She called it trash, but it was my dad's legacy. And she sold it. I was devastated. The house was quiet that morning, the kind of stillness that feels almost sacred. I found myself drawn to the study, the one room my father had always kept immaculate. There, on the polished wooden desk, sat the watch box, the very object that would soon define the storm in my life. Its leather exterior was worn but cared for, soft under my fingers, with faint scratches that told stories of decades past. Each clasp held a secret memory, each watch face reflected fragments of my childhood. I ran my hand across the box, and the subtle scent of leather mixed with the faint, lingering aroma of my father's cologne filled my senses. It was grounding, comforting. A piece of him was here, tangible and unchanging, a silent presence in the room. I opened the lid carefully, almost reverently. The watches inside were lined in velvet, each one distinct, gold, silver, and bronze, their faces glinting under the soft morning light. I could almost hear the gentle tick of each mechanism in my mind, like a heartbeat connecting me to the past. I traced my fingers over the initials engraved on the clasps. D.A., Dad's initials. Memories washed over me in vivid snapshots, him teaching me to tell time, the excitement of choosing my first watch with him, the way he would gently correct my fumbling fingers, guiding me patiently. It was more than a box, it was a vessel of love, of guidance, of all the quiet moments that had shaped who I am. In that moment, I felt a deep sense of pride and belonging. This was family, history, and legacy all wrapped into one. Even now, years after his passing, the box was a bridge to him, a reminder of the warmth in his voice, the firmness of his handshake, the subtle humor that always lingered behind his eyes. My heart swelled with both nostalgia and gratitude, and I found myself speaking softly to it, as if he could hear me. "I'll take care of it, Dad. I promise." I didn't notice her at first, my wife, entering the room with her usual brisk confidence. She was always practical, decisive, the kind of woman who could slice through sentimentality without hesitation. She glanced at the box, and I saw her eyes narrow slightly. Something in her expression hinted at disapproval, or maybe impatience. I instinctively braced myself, not knowing yet what storm she would bring. Even before a word was spoken, I felt the tension in the air. My fingers lingered on the box, holding on to the comfort it gave me. It was my anchor, my quiet corner of the world where nothing could hurt me. And yet, there was a subtle shift, a foreshadowing I couldn't ignore. That simple moment of stillness, of tactile connection to the past, was the calm before the inevitable. This was my sanctuary, my private space of memory and love, and I didn't yet realize that everything about it, every watch, every clasp, every worn edge, would soon be at the center of a painful, life-altering decision. I was still tracing the worn leather of the watch box, letting the warmth of memory settle over me, when she spoke. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, but each word hit like ice in my chest. "It's gone," she said. "I sold the watch box." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. I froze, my fingers hovering just above the leather surface, as if it might somehow reappear if I didn't move. My mind scrambled, rejecting the words as impossible. Gone. Sold. The box, my father's legacy, my connection to him, it was gone. I couldn't speak. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. She, ever composed, continued. "It was just sitting there collecting dust. Trash, really. Our son needs the money more than these old things." Her words were practical, rational, and utterly cruel in their simplicity. I swallowed hard, trying to ground myself. The familiar scent of leather now seemed faint, almost a phantom memory. My chest tightened, the familiar heartbeat of comfort replaced by a hollow, sinking ache. Every memory attached to that box, the lessons, the laughter, the quiet moments with Dad, seemed to vanish along with it. I wanted to shout, to demand why, to argue, but the words felt inadequate. How could I make her understand the gravity of what she'd done? The box was more than wood and leather, it was the embodiment of my history, a tactile connection to the man who shaped my life. And now it had been reduced to a transaction, cash for need, a line she delivered with unwavering certainty. I felt a strange numbness spread through my limbs, like my body had decided to protect itself from the shock. My gaze drifted to the empty desk where the box had rested. Nothing was there. Just the polished wood, clean and bare, and the echo of memories I could no longer touch. She stepped closer, as if sensing my withdrawal. Her hand brushed my arm lightly, almost apologetically. "I didn't think you'd care so much. I thought it was just things." I could barely look at her. Anger, sadness, and a deep, aching betrayal churned inside me. The room felt smaller, oppressive. The sunlight streaming through the curtains now seemed harsh, cutting across the space where the box used to sit. I clenched my fists at my sides, nails pressing into my palms as I tried to anchor myself. I can't believe you did this," I whispered finally, my voice breaking. Not out of spite, but from grief, from a profound sense of loss. The simple, quiet grief that comes from realizing something irreplaceable is gone forever. She didn't argue. She didn't offer another excuse. Her calm presence only amplified the weight of the moment. We stood there, in the quiet room, a chasm between us that felt impossible to cross. I wanted to reach for her, to grasp some sense of reconciliation, but the void left by the watch box seemed too vast. For the first time, I realized that love and practicality could collide in ways that left no one unscathed. And in that collision, I felt utterly, devastatingly alone. After that morning, the house felt different, hollow, quieter, as if the walls themselves were mourning with me. The desk where the watch box had rested was empty, polished and pristine, mocking the memories it once held. I found myself avoiding her gaze, walking past her in silence, each step heavier than the last. My chest ached in ways I didn't expect, not from anger, not even fully from sadness, but from the profound weight of loss. I retreated into my own mind, replaying memories of the watch box and, more importantly, the father it represented. I remembered the first time I'd held a watch he gave me, how he had carefully fastened it around my wrist, adjusting the strap with patience only a father possesses. I could feel his fingers, firm yet gentle, guiding mine. I could hear his laughter as I fumbled to read the time, his voice warm and teasing. Those moments had been ordinary then, but extraordinary in retrospect, anchors that had shaped who I was. Now, they felt fragile, slipping through my fingers like sand. The physical object that had housed them was gone, leaving only memories and a sharp, almost tangible emptiness. I found myself wandering into the study repeatedly, as if the box might somehow return, as if sheer hope could reverse the act. But every time I was met with the same polished desk, the same mocking sunlight that fell where the watches once glinted. I noticed small things I hadn't paid attention to before, the faint scratch on the wood where the box had sat, the subtle indentation of the velvet lining, the dust I had brushed off only days ago. Each tiny detail was a reminder, a thread connecting me to what I had lost. I traced the memories in my mind as though by reconstructing them, I could somehow reclaim the warmth that had vanished from the room. My wife moved through the house with calm efficiency, seemingly unaware of the storm inside me. And yet, in the quiet corners of her gestures, the way she prepared breakfast, the way she paused before leaving the room, I caught glimpses of hesitation, hints of understanding that she hadn't entirely dismissed my attachment. But those small cues were not enough. The tension lingered like a shadow, growing heavier each time I felt the absence of the watch box. I realized, painfully, that my grief was not just for a box or its contents. It was grief for a part of my history, for the tangible connection to a man who had shaped me, and for the reassurance that some things endure. I struggled with anger toward her, yes, but deeper than that was a sense of vulnerability, the uncomfortable awareness that love sometimes collides with practicality in ways that leave the heart exposed. And so I withdrew further, sitting quietly in rooms we once shared laughter in, running my hands over old photographs, tracing the faces of my father and the younger me. Each photo, each memory, became a lifeline even as the physical reminder of the watch box was gone. I was caught between longing and resignation, between wanting to confront and fearing the rupture it might cause. In those silent hours, the story of our life together, and the tension now threading it, began to unfold in my mind. I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that love is not only in grand gestures or shared smiles. Sometimes, it is in enduring the quiet storms, in surviving the spaces left by loss, and in preparing, slowly, to bridge the distance that now lay between two people who still cared, deeply. The tension between us had grown almost unbearable, a quiet weight that hung in the air. I found myself lingering near the study, drawn to the spot where the watch box once rested, as if proximity could somehow repair the void. She noticed, of course. She always notices. Her eyes followed mine that evening, calm but questioning, and for the first time since the sale, I felt the fragile stirrings of dialogue forming between us. "I can't stop thinking about it," I admitted quietly, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. The words felt small compared to the surge of emotion in my chest, but they were all I could manage. My hands fidgeted with the edge of my coffee mug, tracing the rim as if it might anchor me. It wasn't just a box, it was Dad. All the memories, the lessons, everything he left me. She watched me, her fingers lightly brushing her own cup, hesitant yet attentive. "I know," she said softly, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I didn't realize. I thought it was just stuff. Things you could replace. I wanted to help our son." Her words, while practical, carried a trace of vulnerability I hadn't expected. I looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time since the morning of the sale, I saw more than her decisiveness. I saw worry lines etched around her eyes, the subtle tightness in her jaw that came from years of holding herself together for everyone else. I realized then that her action, though devastating to me, had not come from malice, it had come from love, albeit in a way that collided painfully with mine. "I understand why you did it," I said, my voice softer now, tinged with both sadness and relief. "But it hurt, more than I thought it would. It still does." My eyes met hers, lingering, searching for the same understanding I was trying to offer. "I need you to know that." She reached out then, her hand brushing lightly against mine on the table. The touch was brief but electric, a gentle acknowledgement that we were still here, still connected. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and it wasn't just an apology for the box, it was an apology for the hurt, for the oversight, for the gap that had grown between us. We sat like that for a while, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. It was in this quiet, the subtle warmth of her hand, the soft hum of the fridge, the fading light through the curtains, that the tension began to shift. Words were not enough to mend the fracture entirely, but proximity and presence started to bridge it. I realized then that emotional intimacy doesn't always need drama or grand gestures. Sometimes it exists in the small acts, a hand resting briefly on mine, a shared breath across a table, eyes locking in quiet acknowledgement of mutual vulnerability. Our conversation had opened a door, one that allowed the lingering grief and frustration to coexist with love and understanding. By the end of that evening, I felt a subtle shift within me. The ache for the watch box hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, replaced with a tentative hope that we could navigate this loss together. The emotional bridge had begun to form, fragile but real, built on honesty, acknowledgement, and the courage to remain open to one another despite the hurt. The days that followed were quieter than usual, but in that quiet, a new rhythm began to form. It wasn't grand gestures or dramatic apologies that repaired the distance between us, it was the subtle, almost imperceptible ways she showed she cared, and the slow, deliberate ways I allowed myself to notice. I found her in the kitchen one morning, carefully arranging breakfast on the table. The smell of warm toast and brewing coffee filled the room, and for a moment, the tension of the past week seemed to lift. She looked up at me and gave a small, almost shy smile, the kind that reminded me why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. My chest tightened, a mixture of lingering hurt and the warmth of familiarity. I sat down, our hands brushing briefly as I reached for my mug. The touch was fleeting, but enough to send a pulse of reassurance through me. We were still here, still connected. Later that day, I found a note left on my pillow. Her handwriting was careful, neat, yet slightly trembling, a rare glimpse into her vulnerability. It read simply, "I know it still hurts. I see your grief, and I am sorry. We will figure this out together." I held it in my hands, feeling the paper between my fingers like a lifeline. It wasn't the watch box returning to me, but it was a tangible acknowledgement that she understood, that she cared, and that she wanted to rebuild what had been lost. Over the next few days, small moments accumulated, each one quietly knitting the fabric of our relationship back together. A shared laugh over something trivial, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder while we watched the evening news, the brief brush of her fingers as she handed me a plate of food. Each act was mundane on its own, but together they created a mosaic of reassurance, a reminder that love often exists in the small, consistent gestures rather than grand proclamations. I began to notice my own responses, the way I leaned a little closer when she entered the room, the way I allowed myself to linger near her, letting the warmth of proximity speak where words could not. There were no dramatic declarations of forgiveness yet, only the slow, steady reconnection of two people who had been fractured but not broken. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching the soft glow of the sunset through the curtains, our knees touched. It was accidental at first, then deliberate, a quiet acknowledgement that we were finding our way back to each other. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining gently. I felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against mine, a physical reassurance that mirrored the emotional one. It was in that moment, simple yet profound, that I realized reconciliation doesn't always need words. Sometimes it is in presence, in touch, in the shared acknowledgement that despite mistakes and misunderstandings, we are still choosing each other. By the end of that week, the sting of the loss hadn't vanished entirely, but it had softened. It no longer consumed every thought or shadowed every interaction. Instead, it became part of the texture of our lives, a reminder of what matters, a lesson in patience, understanding, and love. Small gestures had begun to repair the fracture, one careful, heartfelt act at a time, and in that quiet rebuilding, I felt the first true stirrings of hope. By the time the week had ended, the atmosphere in our home had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, but in ways that mattered profoundly. The sharp edges of tension had softened into a gentle undercurrent of care and attention. The absence of the watch box still lingered, a quiet reminder of what had been lost, but it no longer dominated our thoughts or interactions. Instead, what took its place was a growing awareness of each other's humanity, our vulnerabilities laid bare in ways that felt safe and intimate. One evening, we found ourselves in the living room, the fading golden light of the late afternoon painting soft patterns across the carpet. She sat close on the couch, a gentle warmth radiating from her as she tucked her legs under her, her hair catching the light in subtle copper tones. I sat beside her, careful to respect the space between us, yet drawn closer by an invisible thread of shared understanding. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her voice almost hesitant. "I see now how much it meant to you." And I didn't fully understand. Her fingers traced a line along the edge of the cushion, as if nervous or searching for the right words. I wanted to help, but I forgot that some things aren't about money. Some things are about memory, connection. I reached out then, letting my hand brush against hers. It was slow, deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of her words and the honesty behind them. "I get that," I said softly, my voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I know you acted out of love. I can see it now. It doesn't erase the hurt, but it helps me understand." Her hand lingered on mine, our fingers entwining naturally, as if they had always been meant to fit together in this simple gesture. It was not passionate or urgent, but intimate in a way that only comes from shared vulnerability, a quiet, profound connection built on trust and empathy rather than fleeting desire. We spoke then, not about blame or anger, but about each other, our fears, and our hopes. I shared memories of my father and the watch box, recounting stories of quiet lessons and small moments of guidance, and she listened, really listened, her eyes soft and attentive. She told me about the stress she had been carrying, the ways she felt responsible for providing for our son, and the weight of decisions that often went unnoticed. As we spoke, I realized how much I had underestimated the depth of her inner life, the strength and vulnerability coexisting within her. And she, in turn, began to see that my attachment to the past was not stubbornness, but a way of honoring the people I loved and the lessons they left behind. In that exchange, the bridge between us strengthened. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic reconciliations, only the quiet, steady realization that we could understand each other, support each other, and still love one another despite mistakes. A shared smile, a lingering squeeze of the hand, a brush of her shoulder against mine, each gesture was a reaffirmation that we were navigating this journey together. By the end of the evening, I felt a profound sense of emotional growth. The hurt had softened into understanding, the tension into trust, and the small moments of intimacy had rekindled the warmth between us. We were learning, slowly but surely, that love is not about perfection or possession, it is about patience, empathy, and the courage to remain open to one another. The days had gradually returned to their quiet rhythm, but something in the air felt different now, softer, warmer, more attuned. The tension that had shadowed every glance, every gesture, had begun to dissolve, leaving room for reflection, understanding, and the kind of intimacy that comes from surviving a shared storm. That evening, we found ourselves together in the study again, though the watchbox was gone. I traced my fingers along the polished desk, now empty, and felt a strange mix of loss and acceptance. The memories remained, vivid and unbroken, living not in objects but in the stories, the laughter, and the moments my father had given me. She sat beside me, close but not intrusive, her presence a quiet reassurance that we could still occupy the same space without the distance of grief between us. "I've been thinking about him," I said softly, my voice carrying the warmth of remembrance. "About the lessons, the stories, and how much of him lives in me now." My hand hovered near hers, and she reached out, letting our fingers brush lightly, almost tentatively, before settling into the natural intimacy that had begun to grow between us. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the desk lamp. "I see that now," she said, her voice gentle. "And I see that what mattered most wasn't the box itself. It was the connection it represented, and I want to honor that with you, however I can." We shared a quiet smile, the kind that holds years of understanding in a single moment. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic apologies. The slow burn of our love, tested and strained by hurt, had transformed into something steadier, more profound. It was a love that could weather mistakes and misunderstandings because it had been forged through honesty, empathy, and shared vulnerability. I leaned closer, resting my shoulder lightly against hers. She responded by shifting slightly, letting her head brush mine, the gesture simple yet profoundly comforting. The warmth of her presence filled the room, and for the first time since the morning the watch box was sold, I felt whole again. Not because the object had returned, it never would, but because the emotional bond that truly mattered had been preserved and strengthened. We spent the rest of the evening talking softly, sharing stories of my father, recounting small childhood memories, and laughing at little things that seemed trivial but carried weight in their familiarity. Each shared glance, each gentle touch, each quiet sigh built a rhythm that felt safe, intimate, and wholly ours. The house, once echoing with tension and loss, now seemed alive with warmth and understanding. As the night settled, we stood together by the window, looking out at the world beyond. I took her hand in mine, our fingers interlaced naturally, a simple affirmation of connection. "We'll be okay," I said, more to myself than to her, and she squeezed my hand gently in response. It was more than reassurance, it was acknowledgement, closure, and commitment all at once. In that moment, I realized that love does not always depend on possession, perfection, or permanence. It thrives in understanding, in shared vulnerability, and in the courage to rebuild together after hurt. The watch box may have been gone, but what truly mattered, the bond between us, the lessons of the past, and the promise of our shared future, remained intact, stronger than ever.